Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Great to see so many of you with us today, and many thanks to all of you for joining this briefing by the Interagency Standing Committee. We hold these meetings actually on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. So it's really wonderful to have the opportunity to talk about accountability to affected people today. So my name is Samantha Newport. I'm with the IASC Secretariat that is based here in Geneva, hosted by OCHA, and I will be hosting this briefing today. And today we really aim to highlight some of the obstacles, some of the good practices in collective accountability to affected people in several different contexts. And also really how we turn our commitments on AAP into action, because fundamentally this is what it's all about. It's all about having an impact on our global humanitarian response. So before we get started, I just wanted to make 2 points. The first point is that I think it's very important to acknowledge the tremendous efforts and progress that have been made in recent years. The humanitarian community at large has really worked to improve the engagement of communities in decision making and to establish policies and processes and tools to allow affected communities to hold humanitarian actors, to hold us, to account. There's still a lot more to do, of course, as a system, and we need to ensure that affected people are, of course, at the center of humanitarian action. I wanted to point as well to the IASC principles statement that came out in 2022 in April, which reaffirmed the commitment of the IASC to accountability to affected people and ensuring that it's sort of central to principled humanitarian action. We do know, however, that there is still a lot to be done, that this is a very context-specific, iterative line of work, and that we need to be respectful of the rights and dignity of affected people in all of their diversity. The second point I wanted to make is really around, how do we do it and what it actually looks like. So it's very important to understand, how we bring affected people into the advocacy and coordination efforts, especially through our national NGO and civil society organisation partners. Without the national NGOs and without the civil society organisations, who are absolutely relentless, we would not hear the voices of the affected people. So really the local NGOs and the CSOs are very much the link between the humanitarian actors and the affected people. And we know that we have to continuously learn, from the experiences of the people that we're serving. And it was very much within this context that the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffiths, launched last year what has been coined the flagship initiative in 4 countries, Colombia, South Sudan, Philippines, and Niger, really to try and explore innovative ways to make us more accountable to the people that we serve. So with that said, I'd now like to turn to the event. We will first hear from our speakers who are joining us from Afghanistan, Colombia, and Burkina Faso, who will all respectively highlight their experiences and some of the obstacles and good practices in relation to the work in AAP in those 3 contexts. And then we will hear more about recent tools and guidance developed by the IASC and specifically one of our task forces that looks at accountability to affected people. So after we've heard the interventions of our 4 speakers, we'll open the floor for a question and answer session and discussion with you, our participants. So I'd like to now welcome our 4 speakers. So we are extremely fortunate to have with us Ms. Mireia Villa-Forner, who is currently the Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator in Colombia. Welcome, Mireia. We also have Marpekai Siddiqui, who is Director of Kabul Orthopedic Organization and co-chair of the Disability Inclusion Working Group in Afghanistan, and Mapakai joins us today from Afghanistan. Welcome, Mapakai. We also have representing the Permanent Secretariat for Non-Governmental Organizations in Burkina Faso, and also serving as the Regional Director covering West Africa for Children Believe. We're delighted to have Ms. Christelle Kalule on the panel today as well. Welcome, Christelle. And last but not least, we have Ms. Tanya Wood, who is one of the co-chairs of the IASC task force that looks at accountability to affected people. And she is also the Executive Director of the CHS Alliance, that's the Core Humanitarian Standard Alliance, which is a global alliance of humanitarian and development organizations committed to making aid work better for people. So welcome, panelists. So we will first hear the introductory remarks from each of the speakers, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. So with no further ado, and thank you for your patience, and please do feel free to turn on your cameras. It's always nice to see faces. So with no further ado, and I can see you on screen, Mapakai, we will hand over to Mapakai. So Mapakai, in addition to being the director of the Kabul Orthopedic Organization and co-chair of the Disability Inclusion Working Group in Afghanistan, she also, was injured in a mine explosion as a child and was not able to go to school until the age of 10. And with the support of the Kabul Orthopedic Organization, which she now leads, she started school in 2012 and now holds a diploma in orthopedic technology from the ICRC and Ghaznavar Institute of Health Sciences. She also received a bachelor degree from the Mahidol University in Thailand and is an advocate and activist for women's rights and disability rights. Thank you very much, Mapakai, and we hand over to you to sort of delve in a little bit more about the situation in Afghanistan since the events of August 2021, with the conditions of Afghan women being significantly more challenging, and what this has meant for your line of work. Over to you, Mapakai. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for having me in this panel, and it's my pleasure to be in this panel and to talk about the situation in Afghanistan. Thank you very much. As you know, I'm here to talk about about Afghans with disability and my own experience as a woman with disability and achievement and challenge that a person with disability in Afghanistan are facing. As you know, the Afghans with disabilities continuing to facing high level of challenge, especially women with disability are facing marginalization and stigma and barriers. As you know, the situation for the situation of Afghan women and girls in our country, imagine beside that to have a disability, and that means we are facing with double discrimination, once because we are woman or girl, others because of our disability. Person with disability, particularly women and girls, are remarkably less likely to get any kind of education, healthcare, or employment, and are often stigmatized and within their family, being unmarginalized. They cannot marry, no one marries with them. As you may saw that Asia Foundation survey in 2029 that find that shows the most severe disability as a prevalence of women with disability. That is why, because no one considering about women in problems and to solving, and it's the big, the small difficulties or problem they have for physical injury they find, but they don't have access for services, so it turned to severe disability. particularly for women who living in rural areas and frequently socially isolated their own family and considered as a source of shame for the family. As we have experience, we went to the most rural area of Afghanistan. When we are talking about the disability, they not accept that they all have a member of their family have disability, because they think it is a shame. So they deny to access the public space and community or even family event. They deny that the person with disability should participate on that. And for more likely that to be kept from school because of the social economical barrier and also inaccessibility of public facility. As you may hear about the inaccessibility in Afghanistan, it is a big challenge for person with disability. Even in the cities, in the capital of Afghanistan, if you go to in the most villages or rural area, how this is a big challenge for all person with disability. So it is also everything be exist in a country, but it be the accessibility not be exist. So it means that we cannot access to them. It means nothing is here for person with disability. And now even about 2 years ago, how the women have some access, like in the capital of Afghanistan, like in Kabul and some other provinces, for to education and some by support of NGOs. But unfortunately, like other girls and women, they are lost this opportunity and they are really hopeless. When I'm daily facing with them and I'm speaking with them, they are very upset and they are hopeless. Now even the DFA not allowing the women to work in NGO. For example, I'm director of a Kabul organization, and my organization is providing physical rehabilitation services for persons with disability. But after the ban on women work, I'm not allowing to work in my organization as a director. Even the ministry not allow me to sign any documents, and a man should be signed instead of me. A man should be a deputy instead of me to work. So besides the disability, to face like this challenge, imagine how life is difficult for person with disability. As you mentioned, I lost my body and mine explosion, and with all the challenge that Afghan women and girls have in Afghanistan, with this all, I try my best to educate and to be, and my important goal was to work for person with disability, to advocate for right of person with disability. That is why I choose a profession that to be working directly for person with disability. Unfortunately, today I cannot reach to my goal, and or some goals and some I reach very difficult. But it is my pleasure that I'm coaching the IWGO Disability Inclusion, working to ensure the inclusion of persons with disability. Let me provide a brief information about disability, about DIWG. DIWG established in 2021 to ensure the more streamlined and coordination to respond by humanitarian and development sectors in Afghanistan to better meet the needs of persons with disability. This working group is co-chaired by United Nations World Food Program, WFP, HI, or Humanitarian Inclusion, and Kabul Orthopedic Organization. And we have we have about more than 180 members. It's from UN agency, international, national NGOs, and OPDs and clusters. And the achievement that have, thanks from AAP working group, they are helping us to have good achievement, and that is it is a big achievement that today we are using this hand to make sure that inclusion of persons with disability in all the programs and projects, that it is minimum standard quality programming with. and the other achievement that we have, mapping of OPDs in Afghanistan and mapping of disability service in Afghanistan, and contribute HRP and HRNO, and also capacity building of DIWG member and other clusters, and review all the proposals that are funding by AHF to make sure that the disability inclusion, and we use the minimum standard that AAP provide us and help us to establish this standard. But we also have the key some challenge. The key challenge of this the DIWG is collected and analyzed data by humanitarian and development sectors is not disability segregated, which is a key discussion making. And the other challenge that OPDs and persons with disabilities have not been meaningfully engaged on through the humanitarian process, which has resulted in exclusion of persons with disability from the humanitarian assistance and capacity building opportunity. And the other challenge, unfortunately, the DFA has posed the issue or renewal of OPDs or persons with disability organization license. And the other, as before I mentioned, the other achievement that our working group has, with support of AAP working group, and we have good coordination with them, and that establishing minimum standards, and we are seeing that AAP is focusing on also on parts of the disability beside the gender and the age and other vulnerability. And thanks for their initiative and for their consideration. And DIWG also have the good coordination with other working group like cluster, health cluster, protection cluster, and others. I have some recommendation. My recommendation as a person with disability and as a woman and as a director, that I'm seeing the challenge of person with disability day by day in our country. My recommendation is disability inclusion should be a high priority of international donor, particularly UN agency, and ensure the meaningful participation of engagement of person with disability through the humanitarian process. I know there is some achievements, but I'm suggesting it should be more and should be stabilized for. So it will help us to person with disability, and also support the civil society, as you mentioned that without a national NGO and civil society, it is not possible to support the peoples. So for person with disability as well, it is an important point. So I'm suggesting to support civil society, OPDs, and NGOs to be able to work for person with disability and to make sure the engagement of person with disability and participation of person with disability and access for services. And my other suggestion is accessibility for person with disability. As I know many of colleagues I am seeing here, they know about the accessibility. The accessibility, as before I mentioned, it is a big challenge for person with disability. Myself, I can say, if I'm not taking your time, that I have physical disability, but due to the inaccessibility of most of the places, but I'm not able even to participate for some meeting, for some discussion, important discussion. Like me, other person with disability also have this problem. Thank you very much. I think you take your more time. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Mapakai. We really appreciate you sharing your very personal experience as well as your professional experience. You know, it's enlightening what everybody's been able to do through the Disability Working Group using the Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund. which is, yeah, so that's fantastic. But thank you so much, Mapakai. I'd now like to ask Mireia Villar-Forner to give us her opening remarks. Before I hand over, just to flag to everybody that Mireia brings more than 27 years of experience within and outside of the UN. And prior to taking up her position in Colombia, she was the resident coordinator in Uruguay and held other senior positions at the UNDP in Uruguay, Bolivia, Iraq, and Belgium, among others. She also has a master's degree in foreign service from Georgetown University and a bachelor's in economics from the University of Barcelona in Spain. Mireia, as one of the countries, or as the representative of one of the countries that is participating in the ERC's flagship initiative, it would be extremely helpful to hear your perspectives on new and innovative coordination approaches to accountability to effective people, and if there's any sort of lessons learned that are already coming out, or any of the challenges indeed that you're facing. Thank you so much, Mireia, and over to you.
Thanks, Samantha. Just to verify that you can hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Well, thanks for giving again a space to Colombia. For us, it's very important to feature in these discussions and bring about this Latin America perspective. And I'm really, really humbled to be among humanitarian, women like Mapakai and Christelle and Tanya herself. So I feel very honored that we're sharing this space. Let me just say a few words. Colombia, I don't know how many you know. As I said, we don't always feature 7 active conflicts ongoing in the country, more than 8 million displaced people, 6 million of which don't have durable solutions to their displacement, a very disproportionate impact of the humanitarian crisis for ethnic populations, both Afro-Colombian and indigenous groups, and a rather seasoned and big humanitarian country team with over 100 organizations. And as Samantha mentioned, we are lucky to be one of the flagship countries, which we see as an opportunity to reinforce some of the things that we're doing well and do more of that and systematize it and be able to share it, but also in some other aspects, maybe change gears or attempt to change gears in what we're doing. So just to say that the whole agenda of accountability to affected populations for us, it's not so much a checklist or adherence to a guidance per se, and I know I'm speaking to the IASC, but it's really a posture. It's about really internalizing a commitment to protecting the dignity of those that we serve and accompany the state to serve. And so we really would like to think that over time, maybe we're not there yet, but over time, this is not even an issue. This is a new way in which we do everything that we do, we bring them on board. And in that sense, so much of what we do under AAP, it's really about the quality of our community engagement. So I want to frame it there because I know that AAP touches on many other dimensions, and it's the same for us, but it really is about shaping and improving the quality of that engagement. So some of the things that we think we're doing, at least going in the right direction. I'm not saying that it's all a done deal. One is that this is a humanitarian country team that is particularly proactive in terms of community engagement and participation. And this is not because of the flagship. This is, I think, a trajectory that started a way back. And as I said, we now can make it shine and show to others. The Colombia team prides itself for its very, very decentralized model. This is a rather large country. Most of our staff, of our humanitarian colleagues, are permanently present in the territories in the countries. We have presence in 16 of the most affected departments in the country. We have 15 local coordination teams. So basically, we have a granularity in the territories that I think it's a must in terms of the trust and the work we want to do with these communities. The team has adopted a very strong protection by presence approach. I mean, many of these territories are affected by violence and conflict. In many of them, the state is not present, and frankly, it's the blue, gilet that sometimes get criticized, but our presence there is really what these communities much appreciate. So we have developed sophisticated mechanisms for community engagement. I mean, one figure that the College in Noche just threw at me, but I think it's quite, we have over 7,000 missions conducted every month across the country. I mean, that's the level of presence, of participation, of accompaniment to these communities. And clearly, this means that our members of the country team, of the humanitarian country team, because they're present, because they engage regularly, because they are known to our communities, they have developed high levels of trust. And again, in a situation of conflict, that trust is key, you know, for some of the difficult decisions that we need to make sometimes. So I think we foster this trust through transparent communication about humanitarian interventions, both when we explain what we're trying to do, but also in some cases when we explain why we will not accompany them. And I think that's something that maybe we don't speak much, but given that there are political interventions ongoing in territories with humanitarian needs, making that differentiation and keeping ourselves, you know, within our principle, it's something that also at times we need to explain to these communities. The second big thing that I think we do right is that we've been working intensively in empowering the local communities. This is a country with a layer of resilience that it sits in the local communities, it sits in women's organizations, that explains why, despite decades of violence, you know, people are still, you know, surviving, sometimes with difficulty, clearly with lots of difficulty. And we depend massively on this layer of capacity that exists at very, very local levels. So beyond what we do in terms of our humanitarian response, we also work with these communities to strengthen their own capacity, to better prevent the emergencies, to develop their own protection mechanisms. We try to adapt the tools that would make more sense for the recovery. The other thing that I think we do quite well, and we could expand on it later if you wish, is that we've made significant progress in integrating the differentiated approaches. As I mentioned earlier, the ethnic communities are, you know, 41% of those impacted and needed support, emergency support, are ethnic communities. We call ethnic both the indigenous and the Afro-Colombians. But the same for women, for youth, for some of the unique needs that some groups have. So we've created an indigenous peoples working group within the structure of the humanitarian country team. We have a strategy around that, and we are quite sensitive to respecting and acknowledging, you know, their own traditions, beliefs, and cosmovision in the work that we do. So we are quite proactive in our community engagement and participation. We constantly seek to empower local communities with this acknowledgement of the differences that they have, but also we have collaborative partnerships. Under the flagship initiative, for instance, and building on this decentralized model that we have, we're really pushing our planning processes to include these communities. And we just concluded the HNO and HRP. We're just wrapping up that process. And on this occasion, we've done the numbers. We have 50% of those that participate, and this is across the country in some 19 workshops that we did across the territory, we accounted for, and 50% of those that participated are either you know, local NGOs, social organizations, or the communities themselves. So we are reaching out to a degree that we were not reaching out before, and what we're going to have to look at is how that participation will change the outcomes of the HNO and the HRP, to what extent that participation will inform in a different way, you know, what we then would be building into the response. Something that we've had to do in the case of Colombia, and in other areas has not been as easy, but I think on AAP we've found a common ground, is that we have, in effect, two humanitarian structures. We have the response for Venezuelans mechanism in Colombia, and we have obviously the cluster system under our humanitarian country team. But for AAP particularly, we have one group. I mean, it was hard enough, you know, to attend to the many dimensions of AAP and some of the other cross-cutting policies that we need to take into account. So our AAP platform is a common one for both the response for Venezuela and for the humanitarian, so that we don't make a distinction by nationality in the way we operate. So in short, I think our approach in Colombia tries to recognize the particular challenges that indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities face, and particularly the vulnerable segments of the population, such as women, youth, and children. And this very decentralized presence that we have, this active engagement, the localization efforts, and by the way, we are reestablishing a country-based pool fund for localization. This is in the making at this moment. So I think these are all ways in which we try to make sure that the data we collect is inclusive, that we commit to capacity building, and that we honor this cultural diversity, and not only honor them, but actually empower them to be agents of the processes that we support. And maybe just to conclude, some of the areas where I think, we're struggling, and I suppose that we're not the only ones. And one of them has to do with this idea of the feedback mechanisms. And I would like to extend that to not only feedback for AAP, but I face it very personally on issues of PSCA. And it's a challenge for the humanitarians. I can tell you it's also a challenge for our development country teams, for UNCTs. I feel a huge burden as the leader of the humanitarian country team, and a huge responsibility in a country full of red flags in terms of issues like PSCA, that our headquarters are very quick to land on us accountability frameworks, but we are hardly ever given any resources to push this agenda in an integrated manner. So in essence, what's happening is that some of our agencies and some of our members in the country teams, not only the agencies, are committed to the issue and they have their own mechanisms. But we know that there is no sense at all in duplicating mechanisms within the same communities where we work. So the need to, it's been very important to create that awareness, and agencies take responsibility and build it in the, but at a moment when we're trying to bring the humanitarian response to a more integrated approach, we need to start cutting and bringing and joining again some of these efforts. Just to give you an example, the SURF that we are implementing this year in Colombia, which is part particularly of what we're trying to do with the flagship, is to really come together as agencies. In this case, it's UN agencies working with some of the partners to work together and change the offer of what we're offering to these communities, having listened to them. So we are not only bringing health, but we're bringing mental health. We're not only bringing protection, but also protection against sexual violence. We are not only bringing food, but we're really looking at the issue of livelihoods, because mental health, livelihoods, and protection to sexual violence are the kind of things that used to fall through the cracks, where were never prioritized, yet they were the things that the communities were asking, if not the most, very, very strongly. So I think that we have a process going there with this SURF to really bring together a much larger group of agencies in the very same communities and providing a package of support and protection that hopefully would enable a linkage to the institutions taking up their role. But what we're seeing is that when we start programming for these joint interventions, then we have 5 or 7 different policies that we need to mainstream and 5 or 7 different community complaint mechanisms. And obviously that makes absolute no sense. So what we're trying to do with the support of UNICEF in this case is to really, under the SURF, to pilot an approach that's going to bring together all these commitments. And we would like that to eventually transpire to all the other programming that we do. Clearly, it's a lot easier for me in my leadership role to push changes and to push the envelopes when I have a saying in the way we program these resources. But it's also fair to say that of the overall humanitarian response, the SURF is a very small pot of money. So the challenge we're going to have, and it's to really work with donors and with the agencies and with the members of the country team to adopt these logics of work, a more integrated response, and a more simplified and common addressing of the policies that we have to do. We have very little capacities as OCHA and even as the RCO to really support integrated responses on all these issues. And I was mentioning PSCA. I'm constantly begging for money. So I feel that institutionally we have created expectations and standards that are not always accompanied and pushed from where it's most effective, which is from decentralized leadership. So I say that, shamelessly. I know it may sound, but I think that we are in a position to accelerate change in those issues, and yet we are the ones endowed with the least resources to do so. So I'll leave it at that. I think we are on a good track and we have much to show, but there are also expectations, I think, that are a bit disproportionate, and we're, if anything, in an agenda to simplify what I think in years gone by has become a very complex and cumbersome response to AAP. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mireia. That's absolutely fascinating, and that was very inspirational. And I think some of those figures of 7,000 missions across Colombia every month and 15 local coordination teams, I think that just sounds awesome in the true sense of the word. So thanks so much for sharing all of that. It's absolutely fascinating. There is so much going on. You're right, and we hear you loud and clear on the need for resources to match the expectations. So thank you so much, Mireia. So I'd now like to move to our next speaker, who is Christelle Kalule. And since July 2020, Christelle has served as the chair of the Permanent Secretariat for Non-Governmental Organizations. So this is a CSO, a civil society organization in Burkina Faso with 260 members. So given the magnitude of the humanitarian crisis in Burkina Faso on rural communities, Christelle is working on various initiatives aimed at providing a quality humanitarian response to IDPs and strengthening local leadership for sustainable solutions. So I think, Christelle, with no further ado, we will hand over to you. We are hugely grateful for you coming to this briefing today, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about the experience in Burkina Faso and the broader Sahel, in particular with regard to accountability to affected people and how it's integral in the response in the current situation in Burkina Faso. So thank you so much, Christelle, and over to you.
Thank you very much. This is a real honor to be in these platforms. I'm very grateful, as Mireia said, to be also part of the panelists. So I would like to introduce the two organizations that I'm representing so that you can understand a bit more about the context on which we are working. So as you rightly introduced, I'm a regional director for Children Believe, which is an organization that is working globally to empower children to dream fearlessly and stand up for what they believe in. It has been doing so for 16 plus years. And at the same time, I'm working for, I have been appointed chair of the Permanent Secretariat for Non-Governmental Organization in Burkina Faso. You mentioned the membership. We have 260 members, which is mostly composed by national organizations, even though we also have international NGO part of that forum. And we are also part, we have a few members sitting in the humanitarian team in the HCT also, where we have the opportunity also to contribute to the humanitarian response in Burkina Faso. Coming to the country context, the Sahel Central, as you may have heard, is facing a security and humanitarian crisis, which is dragging and becoming more complex and leading to massive displacement of population towards urban centers. As per UNHCR records in June 2023, the West and Central Africa region had 13.3 million forcibly displaced and stateless people. And this number has nearly doubled since 2018. And in this part of Africa, governments and population feel the crisis they face is invisible and or neglected by the international community. And this is putting another level of pressure on humanitarian workers. And you can also imagine that I'm so glad to be part of this panel because that gives me the opportunity to speak more about our reality. And in such a very complex context, many non-governmental organizations remain committed and work with the government agencies, especially the Emergency Relief Committee, to provide humanitarian assistance in a very challenging and rapidly changing context. For instance, in Burkina Faso, we have currently, as per August 2023 data, we have 4.7 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. And in Burkina Faso only, we have near 1.9 million internal displaced people. And out of this number, more than 800 are in areas of cut from the rest of the countries. And 1 million of them are school children. So this is giving you the context in which we are providing the humanitarian response. Coming to the, I just want to share a point about the challenges that CSOs, NGOs are facing in terms of the accountability to affected people and communities. One of the main challenges I can mention is the crisis in the Sahel Central is really not sufficiently funded, and we know that there are so many crises going everywhere in the world, so that the budget allocated to the Sahel is not that to the HRP. If I share the HRP figures, we have reached 30% of funding, which is showing still a gap. And the reason I'm mentioning the financial challenge is that with less fund, it is hard to get high qualified human resource. It is difficult to have technical capabilities and capacities, and even worse, it gives you less possibilities to adapt services to the real need of affected people and communities. The second challenge I want to share is also how we deal with rapid assessment, which most of the time are more donor-driven requirements. It doesn't always give enough time to go in depth and to understand or to have proper listening and dialogue mechanism with affected communities and people. Especially if you take the countries like Burkina Faso, where it takes time to build trust and to have people express themselves. A rapid assessment doesn't always, or quick evaluation doesn't always allow to really hear the needs and the expectation of affected population. And many affected people have hard time to get information. Recently, there were a survey that was conducted by Search for Common Ground in Burkina Faso, and we clearly could see that it is critical for internal displaced people when they arrive massively to have information, key information, since they are not gathered in camps. For instance, basic information on where to get some services and even to understand the processes is often very challenging for people who are leaving villages towards urban centers. The other challenge is that mechanism for accountability is not always systematic or effective. There have been so many progress, but it is a working process. But there are some progress, but it's still not systematic and always effective. And the other challenge I would like to mention is interagency feedback mechanism is quite weak. When it exists, it is either led by NGO or by UN agencies. For instance, in Burkina Faso, one of the good practice and model is what World Food Program is having a hotline that is functional with all the support services available. But this is not always the case for especially interagency coordination mechanism. In terms of good practices, I want to share that there are certainly some progresses, as I said, And for instance, there are also some opportunities for further engaging with affected population and communities. For instance, if you take the case of our countries, one easier way to engage and to get feedback is interactive radio programs. And for instance, we have implemented some programs where we have interactive radio programs where listeners can call and provide feedback on services and raise some concerns and also to make some suggestions. And this is working very well because it is anonymous and it is also somehow interactive. The journalists can ask questions and some follow-up people can call and give even further information and so and so. So this is something which is very simple, but which is very effective and which give an opportunity to hear the voice of affected people. There is also post-distribution monitoring, which is well conducted, and when well conducted, can enable to have the feedback of affected people and also to improve the next phases. And there are also some listening exercises, especially when you close one round of project and you go for another one. This is a very good moment to have some small groups and really have a conversation. They can give you suggestion on how the next level can work. In the context of Africa, you know, sometimes the hotline is not really working well, and because it's like a silent channel to people, people are really more in an engagement mood. So let me now take you through a few recommendations to improve, you know, the involvement and the engagement of affected people. The first one is that accountability mechanism should be systematically integrated by donors in the project that they fund. For instance, simple way of doing that is to include survey evaluation and also to enable some flexibility for adjustment. Because when you ask feedback from affected people and you are not able to take that into account, it results on people being silent and not providing feedback for future. And the example I said from the survey that I mentioned is very, very helpful because it did really help to have a clear idea of where the challenges are and where to address that. The second recommendation is that OSHA should effectively support accountability to affected people. You know, unfortunately for the Sahel Central, due to the crisis and the challenge of access, which is crystallizing most energy and effort, we don't always have emphasis on the engagement of affected people. But here, I think that is where national platforms like SPONG can play an independent can help with leading an independent evaluation that helps to hear the authentic voice of affected people. And I think these are things that can be even more maximized. The third recommendation is to have a working group on accountability and community engagement that is more dynamic and even proactive. Especially in our context, you know that we have been having some challenges with the acceptance of humanitarian work. So this is a very good platform that can allow reflection, suggestion, and even advocacy and lobbying. The fourth recommendation is interagency accountability mechanism, which should be promoted and coordination should be more effective. I would like to say and to acknowledge that agencies individually are really doing a good work, but where we have challenge is how we really reach a coordination and interagency accountability mechanism where various agencies can learn from each other and we can coordinate, you know, the lesson learned and the way forward. And the final recommendation is that children and women who are disproportionately affected by the crisis, they represent 52%. They are also a strong force for change. They should be heard, included, and empowered. And my conclusion now would be really to say that despite the challenges of access that we have in the Sahel Central, which is taking everyone attention, I strongly believe that giving attention to affected people would help enhance acceptance of humanitarian work. And NGOs being at the front line of the response in this context, they should be given more resources. I mean, even the technical capacities and whatever is needed to continuously engage with affected people. And my final point would go to UN OSHA in the Sahel Central is playing an important role and should seek better ways to enhance interagency coordination by developing accessible and safe mechanisms. And in this regards, NGO platforms and NGOs can play a greater role. Their context knowledge and field experience can certainly be maximized. Thank you for your kind attention.
Christelle, thank you so much. Also, just absolutely fascinating and really underscoring the importance of the role of NGOs in this work, and also, of course, the challenges. But thanks so much for giving us this expose. It's absolutely fascinating. Colleagues, I'm now going to move swiftly to Tanya Wood. I realise that we are 51 minutes past the hour. Tanya is the co-chair of IASC Task Force 2 and the executive director of the Core Humanitarian Standard Alliance. Her areas of expertise include strategy and organizational development and elaborating partnership and coordination platforms and policies. So Tanya, with no further ado, I would like to hand over to you to perhaps sort of set the scene for us. And if you could describe, some of this very important work that's going on at the global level in the IASC, in relation to tools, resources, and guidance. So that would be extremely helpful. Thank you very much, Tanya, and over to you. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like you to sort of keep it to about 7 minutes, and then we'll be wrapping it up. Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks. I'll do my best, Sam, and especially as the other. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good. Well, luckily, I think the other fantastic women on the panel have done a great job of kind of summing it up. So I think my role is to just try and kind of coordinate and build on what they've said and bring it back to the task force's work. But I think what they've all said so eloquently is, and I think the reminder we all have to give ourselves, is that it is the people in crisis, and we've seen those fantastic pictures just up that Christella had, which were beautiful, but it is those people in crisis that are the reasons why our institutions exist, and it's those people and it's how they experience our work that are the kind of key measure of how we're performing. So I think that's a reminder. You told us at the beginning, Sam, of the IASC principle statements that really made this strong call that accountability to affected people is non-negotiable, and it really is driving all of our work. And I think maybe just to sort of set the scene before I go into more of the practical side, I think we heard from Mapeki around how, this sort of moral imperative about giving dignity and respect, like that's fundamentally what we're trying to do, and accountability to affected people is really making sure that we do that in the most dignified way. But I think especially where this webinar is happening, when we're just absolutely bombarded with how horrific the growing needs are and how stretched the humanitarian system is, and 300 million people in need of assistance, and we're just seeing that go exponentially up each day at the moment, tragically, I think. And also we're seeing the resources diminishing, that there's also this point, and I think, Mirella, you said it, around sort of how do we prioritize? You're really stuck with all of this sort of bombardment of needs, and you really brought that to the fore with your intervention. How do we prioritize? And the only way we can really prioritize is by taking a proper AAP approach. What are the needs? What do the people want? And how are we adapting our work to prioritise. So it's not only a moral imperative, but it's also a pragmatic means of how we move forward as institutions, but also as this interagency collective approach as well. But the question, I think, has been, you know, the task force grapples with it, the donors grapple with it, the NGO networks grapple with it, but how? How are we doing that? For the CHS Alliance, which I represent, it means that we expect organisations to actually see and uphold and measure how they're meeting the CHS commitments, the commitments that the sector's made to how it will work with people, because of an organisational accountability that we all have, from leadership down to the ground, in how we're working for the people. But the question then is, what does that mean at a collective level? Because it doesn't matter if we're all doing this in different ways, in different organisations, we're not going to be able to make that shift. So that's what the IASC Task Force on Accountability is grappling with, in terms of what does that look like at a collective systematic change. So let me just talk finally a little bit pragmatically about what that looks like. The task force has given itself a very ambitious goal, which recognises that AAP is about a system change. It is about that power shift. The flagship initiative that Mirella's working on really is about how do we flip that system? How do we change and adapt based on the views of people? So it is looking at the leadership. And again, Mirella said it clearly, you know, it is about how the leadership changes and adapts and promotes this. We've heard it from both Christella and Mapike about how do we make a more inclusive system, whose voice are we looking at, whose are we hearing, who's at the table. So we've got another target around a more about more inclusive system and architecture. And then, Christella, you put it there as well. It's also about how do we manage the resources? How are those funding? How is the donors responding to this as well? Because it is a power shift. So those with power, and that includes many of us who hold resources, move resources through the system, are being adaptable, and how we're making decisions. So it really is about that quality funding as well that will enable a more accountable system to the people affected. Mirella, you mentioned about different ways of the organisations, the agencies around in the HCT doing things in different ways. So the task force is working on a kind of a suite of guidance and approaches to help the HCTs in that approach. So one is about leadership training. So specifically about trying to enable HCs to honour the HC Compact on AAP as well. So one area that we're working on is on leadership training. It's also important, though, that we understand that a lot of work is already being done. So there's another tool, there's 5 tools. The second tool around an IASC results tracker, which looks at kind of what already is working, what do we know, where are the gaps, what's working well, aligned to the CHS commitments, but looking at the collective efforts on those to give us an evidence base. And then really excitingly, and we're about to hopefully get this approved by the end of the year, and there's a lot of work being done, particularly in a lot of in Afghanistan it was done, as well around the AAP framework, and work done to discuss that, which is about how then do you develop the collective action plan, because it's all very well, it's not just about these guidance, it's about what are we actually going to do about this, and how do we have a whole of response plan, so it's not just different agencies doing it in their way. And then I think it was Christella, we heard from you the real challenge around community feedback and the challenges with that, and we see it in the CHS data and evidence. There's a weakness across the system. We're not very good at it. So we're working as a task force on a better approach to collective feedback mechanisms, which will help us be able to respond to the needs of communities, but also as well, like, let's understand that the whole sort of sexual exploitation and abuse challenges come through that feedback, and we have a strong accountability to deal with those. So we're working as well with the PSEAH task force, or reference group now that it's called, on how those two combine. And finally, around search capacity. So how do we have a ability that we can help, even though it's not a technical area as such? It's really good if you know and have people who know what we can pull on, what else exists in the system to help. So there's those 5 elements which we're pulling together and will be launched early next year from the task force, which are about trying to give some guidance. But I'll just finish there. I'm aware I've got 1 more minute, 30 seconds, Sam, just because then there's 2 more areas in the work plan where I don't want to kind of sugarcoat and again go to Mirella's point. This isn't all about guidance and tools. They're important to help us move forward. But there's 2 fundamental parts of the task force that is taking a lot more kind of consideration and thought. And I just want to reiterate those because they've come up today. Inclusion, whose voice, who's making the decisions, who are we listening to, how are we adapting based on those. So the inclusion and the authentic, as Christella said, the authentic voices that we're listening to. And then finally as well, how do we, as we, in the broader sense, the sort of donor community or the internationals or those who are passing money through the chain, how are we looking at how we resource? How do we look at how we're enabling this? How do we listen to the decision making and make those adaptations? So the 2 areas around inclusion and donor, we're working with the Grand Bargain on how we do more with the donors, but there's still much more work for all of us to do, and the task force will continue to look at those. Thanks, Sam. Sorry, didn't quite make it in your 7.
You did a grand job, Tanya. Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, thank you so much, Tanya. It's great to hear it from the global perspective, you know, and of course the challenges of the collective. I mean, that is really, you know, that is really significant within the context of the IASC, but great to hear about all the different tools that are being worked on, you know, in support of operations. So thank you very much indeed for that. Colleagues, honestly, this has been absolutely riveting, and ordinarily we finish early and we have time for questions. But on this occasion, we do not. So we did put a message in the chat, and we would encourage people to put some questions there. And if we can answer, we will. And if not, we can direct it to Mapikai, Mireia, Tanya, or Christelle. And I think at this juncture, I'd just really like to thank everybody for joining this briefing. We really appreciate it. We hope it was helpful. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And I would in particular, of course, like to thank our 4 speakers, Mireia, Mapikai, Tanya, and Christelle, for taking the time to share your expertise and your experiences today. You know, this is something that we're all trying to push, you know, in our different ways, at our different levels, facing different challenges, but it's so important to hear what's happening in all these different corners of the globe. And, you know, I really, really thank you. So we have recorded this briefing as well, and it will be posted online over the next few days, and we will also circulate the presentations to participants. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your attention. You can see our social media handles on the screen. And thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, night, wherever you may be. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.